Thank you, everyone. Good morning and welcome to the Bill Gallagher Room for day 2 of the convention. Before we get started, just got to take care of a bit of housekeeping. The first and most important thing is to say thank you to our sponsors and exhibitors. It's a long list, but everyone deserves a mention. So I'm going to go through all of them to show our appreciation. Would like to thank SA3, Milliman, Liberty Group, Discovery, Sunlum, Hanover Re, Gen Re, Insight Actuaries, MBE Consulting, Old Mutual, RGA, Hollard, QED, Data Symphony, Dynamo Analytics, FIS Global, MNG Investments, Momentum Metropolitan, Munich Re, Network Finance, SCORE, Software Alliance, Swiss Re, Zavonia Actuaries and Consultants, Algorithm Consultants and Actuaries, and Outsurance. A big thank you to all of those sponsors for making the convention possible. A few things to note about the amenities that you can take advantage of throughout the day in the exhibition hall. If you get thirsty, you need to hydrate. Maybe yesterday you had a bit too much wine and you need some water. You can fill your water bottle at the hydration station. There's a mosaic wall where you can add your selfie and help us create a beautiful piece of art, a visual reminder of the convention. So please, if you can, take a selfie and add to that mosaic. There's a working lounge if you need to do some work or you need to take a quick meeting or a call. The Discovery Working Lounge is there for that. We also want to remind you of the need to collect your ASA socks. We know they ran out yesterday, but they are now available at the garderobe. If you were unable to collect yesterday, please do so today.
Perfect. Also, if you've purchased a ticket to attend the cocktail and the dinner tonight, you'll need a wristband, so you can also collect that from the garderobe, and as well as your parking ticket. Now, let's talk about the chess finale. I think the moment a lot of people have been waiting for. That'll take place during the morning's refreshment break. So this is where we will witness the crowning of the first ever Insight ASA Convention Chess Champion. It's not just about the title, it's also about the 10,000 Rand cash prize that awaits the victor or victrix. And of course, the matching donation to the Moves for Life organization. Be sure to catch the final at 9 during the break in the chess tournament area at the exhibition hall. A reminder about the Q&A, we'll take questions following the session. Preference will be given to questions in the room. If there's time for questions coming online via the app, then we'll ask some of those as well. If we don't get to ask some burning questions in the room, feel free to connect with the speakers via the connections functions in the app. Okay, so this morning's talk is on micro-insurance. After the debate, you will have the opportunity to vote for the winner. So please go into the polling feature within the app, and then you answer or you rate them according to 4 criteria to decide the winner. This morning's topic is the debate, are we sniffing home? Surely we don't need a separate licensing category for micro-insurance. The presenters for today is BONOLO PELELE, Keith MBERENGWA, TASHVIR KALAWAN, and CHEN, and we are facilitated by Belusi Malloy. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, and good morning, colleagues. I'm going to do the easy job today. We'll leave the tough job to the colleagues to my right here. So I'm going to introduce them. I don't think I need to talk a lot about myself, but just briefly. My name is Belusi Malloy. I chair the Micro-Insurance Committee of ASA. See if we can navigate these slides here. All right, so just briefly in terms of how we're going to do this, I'm going to introduce the teams. talk to you about the structure of the debate this morning. Before they come up, I'm going to talk a little bit about microinsurance, which is just some basics and background. Then we're going to have the debate. Sorry, let me just go back here. We're going to have the debate, which they will do. We'll have 3 stages of that. And then finally, we're going to have a vote at the end, because there must be a winner. Okay, I'm going to do some introductions. You can see my beautiful picture on the right, but we don't need to talk about that. So, TASHVIR, just going to go through his profile now. He's a fellow of ASA and a consulting actuary at True South. He has almost 15 years of experience spanning life, damages, and government compensation schemes. He oversees the first-line actuarial function for a large composite micro-insurer in South Africa, with his responsibilities including valuations, forecasting, product development, and license applications. Welcome, TASHVIR. Okay, and moving on to CHEN. She's a senior actuarial analyst in the short-term insurance practice area as part of Actuarial and Insurance Solutions. I believe this is at Deloitte. So she's a student member of ASA. Her work covers all aspects of short-term insurance, actuarial work, as well as micro-insurance work across a range of different companies. This includes internal audit reviews, first-line actuarial work, as well as micro-insurance work, as indicated before. She has been part of the audit team at Deloitte, working on IFRS 17 for the last 2.5 years. So welcome, CHEN. Okay, moving along to Keith, next to her. Her colleague, actually, is also a senior actuarial analyst at Deloitte in the short-term insurance space. So it's good to have a bit of variety, life and short-term. His work covers all aspects of short-term insurance actuarial work, as well as micro-insurance work across various clients. This includes IFRS 17 implementation, internal audit reviews, first-line work, audit support, etc., etc. It's quite a lot to read here. So, welcome. We don't have a lot of time. We want to leave time for the exciting part, which we are all here for. And finally, to his right is BONOLO. BONOLO is a manager at Kedari Advisory. She has over 7 years' experience in the life insurance industry. This includes actuarial modeling, valuations across the different bases, pricing and product development, as well as audit work. She has managed a microinsurance client as the lead first-line actuary for the last year. This has included leading the actuarial team, sitting on EXCO, presenting to the board on various matters. BONOLO has completed all her actuarial exams and waiting for the professionalism course to qualify. I think it's a topical issue, this whole issue of whether you qualified when you finish your exams or not. So, but she's done with all that. So welcome to you, BONOLO. All right, so what we're going to have, just to remind you here, what is the question that we're trying to deal with? So the question is, or rather the statement for the debate is, surely we don't need a separate licensing category for microinsurers. It would be interesting if you agree with this statement, because it has massive implications. Obviously, the debaters here that I'm going to talk about in a minute, this is not their personal views, just need to be clear about that. It's a debate. We've allocated them to teams. So just a disclaimer. So the affirmative team, we're going to have TASHVIR and CHEN, who agree that we don't need a separate licensing category. And then the opposing team is Keith and BONOLO, who essentially oppose that statement. So that's the team. This is how it's going to go. We're going to have opening statements. I'm going to time them so that they stick to their time. and I'll remind them when there's a minute left so they can move right along. And then after that, we're going to have further arguments for about 8 minutes each, and then a rebuttal in the end. We'll allow you to vote, and then we're going to conclude. Before we do that, let me just quickly run through some background to microinsurance. So the business case is essentially about financial inclusion, which allows companies to write simple products to mainly the lower income groups. And the regulations are also a little bit less onerous. So we're going to just chat through these 3 pillars quickly in terms of the products and then regulation, with this idea of financial inclusion at the back of our minds. Okay, product design. So now, it's important to note that with microinsurance, you have both a short-term license or non-life, let's call it, and then you have a life license, or you can also have a composite license. If you remember, the new Insurance Act has separated those two, so an entity would need to get separate licenses, but for microinsurance, you can get a composite license. So that's what we're showing over there. Just some salient features for the products. Some very simplicity is the key here, and there's some rules around this. So claims need to be finalized within 48 hours, and the contracts are short-term contract boundary, which I think is good for IFRS 17 and other complex things that actuaries have to do. Risk-only products, rider benefits, there's a cap on that, and then a limit on the excess on the short-term insurance side. Commission is not capped, so that's just up to the entity to decide what they want to do. And then obviously some restrictions on exclusions for funeral products. Now, in terms of the stuff that we love and we do every day, the GOIs, we have GOMs for microinsurers, so just comparing the two, focusing on these 3 areas. So when it comes to the OSA and policies, this is a little bit less onerous. In theory, it can be hectic. Board committees, there's no need for risk remuneration committees. The control functions are still there. You have the head of actuarial function. And we do remind you that you need a practicing certificate to take up those positions. FSIs, you know them. There's FSMs on the other side with microinsurance. So quickly, in terms of technical provisions and capital requirements, it's formula-based. So as you can see on the screen, it's about 15% of net premiums. That will be your MCR, subject to a minimum of 4 million, compared to the 15, of course, for traditional insurers. And then in terms of technical provisions, you're looking at IBNR, outstanding claims reserve, UPR, URP, this kind of thing you see with group products and with short-term insurance products. In terms of the IBNR, 7% of net premiums. Obviously, when it comes to life and non-life companies, this is a complicated process. Best estimate liabilities, risk margins, and the like. So that's kind of just comparing that. In terms of where we are now, we have almost the same number of practicing certificate holders as the number of microinsurers that have been licensed, which is perfect. So just giving you a sense there. The one thing that we're still looking to do is to make sure we continue to attract practicing certificate holders in this area, particularly focusing on women and people of color in terms of diversity. So I'm quite happy we have a very diverse team of debaters here. Cool. I think that should be enough about me for now. So what we'll do, we'll go back to this slide. And then I'll invite all of you to have fun with this. Let's not be tense. This is a relaxed environment. Now, opening statements. I'll start with Ting in the affirmative team. Thank you. Over to you, Ting.
Thank you. Cool. So, microinsurers are insurers. So why not treat them like all other insurers? While we understand that microinsurance is aimed at promoting market penetration and financial inclusion for the low-income consumers, the affirmative team will aim to present a case that shows that keeping the status quo and having a separate microinsurance license is not necessary, and that having simpler legislation does not actually promote market access. Our argument will present the following key points. There is currently the same licensing process for microinsurers and traditional insurers, and that's vigorous in nature already. While the capital requirements may be simplified, the operational aspects such as audits and actuarial functions are all the same. They also both have to demonstrate the appropriate controls and governance structure. So while the GOMs are simplified versions of the GOI, good governance will always be valued. There are also a lot of different stakeholders that we need to consider. The board of directors for a microinsurer have the same responsibilities as for a traditional insurer. The auditors perform the same audit checks on financials and systems, and audit fees are not necessarily lower. From a policyholder perspective, while premiums may be reduced from the cost savings of reserving and capital simplifications, the lack of complexity of products might actually lead the company to face anti-selection and writing higher risk, therefore increasing the premiums and negating any cost savings that would have filtered through. And since microinsurers are relatively new to the market, policyholders may feel more protected with a traditional insurer, especially considering that the capital requirements for a microinsurer are not necessarily set at the 99.5th percentile. Now, a microinsurer is also limited to the types of assets that can be invested in, and that's cash and cash equivalents or investment funds limited to money market funds. While these assets are highly liquid, they may limit the amount of investment return that can be gained, and thus impacting shareholder returns. In general, IFRS 17 already requires sophisticated actuarial techniques to be used, and that can be leveraged when performing SAM calculations. As it stands, the difference in reserving results under the different bases may lead to confusion and lead to a difference in financial results and economic capital. The FSMs are simplified versions of the FSIs, with the main simplification coming from the standard formula capital components, and that is market risk, life underwriting risk, and non-life underwriting risk. If an additional capital add-on is required by the microinsurer for holding a separately PA-approved asset, such as government bonds, then the principles underlying a market risk would need to be used in any case. The FSMs also prescribe a 15% parameter that needs to be applied to the MCR. This method may be oversimplified and may not be appropriate for the actual risks faced by the insurer. It also does not allow the insurer to assess the largest contributor to their capital requirements and implement risk mitigation strategies in order to manage those risks. The capital requirement also does not allow for operational risk or any diversification benefits, and that's all part of normal insurance operations, and that's not specific to a traditional insurer. The simplified capital requirement may lead companies to seek a more complex model to determine their economic capital in any case. On the other hand, the 15% parameter to calculate the MCR may lead to a significantly higher or lower life or insurance SCR counterparts. So this may lead to opportunistic behavior. So the question for the market is, do we want to incentivize this opportunistic behavior? If we incentivize this, it can lead to a highly competitive market where price differences are eliminated. It can improve liquidity in the industry and promote large growth in the industry. However, a highly competitive market is often coupled with low profits. The FSMs also prescribe a factor of 7% that needs to apply to the net written premiums in order to calculate the IBNR reserve. This is again oversimplified and does not consider any reporting delays or lack thereof that would lead to a higher or lower IBNR reserve. And the 7% factor also does not allow for negative RAND reserves. We've also seen that the PA has recently issued a temporary notice such that micro-insurers may no longer have shorter waiting periods for policy benefits payable on death, disability, or health events caused by natural causes. This is because it effectively puts micro-insurers at a competitive disadvantage because they would face adverse anti-selection and effectively write higher risks. And that would lead to higher premiums in order to allow for that. So again, any cost savings that was derived would have been negated. These are just a few possible aspects of microinsurance regulations that may lead microinsurers to have a competitive disadvantage. So, in conclusion, microinsurance may aim to simplify many aspects of insurance, but these simplifications open them up to anti-selections and possible adverse experience that are taken on, and that drives up the premiums. Higher premiums means that accessibility and affordability are harder to achieve for the low-income consumer. There are also many technical aspects there are also many technical aspects of microinsurance that do not allow for the specific underwriting or insurance risks that are taken on by the insurer, and they don't allow for operational risk or any diversification benefit. The same vigorous licensing process are required, and the same governance and controls requirements are also the same as the traditional insurer. So that may limit market penetration. We also need to be mindful that other regulations have not necessarily caught up with the separation of the microinsurance license, and that may lead to difficulties in presenting your financials or the financial position of the company. IFRS 17 aims to standardize insurance companies, so that's the presentation of life and non-life insurers. And that should include microinsurers as well. If the aim is to standardize insurance companies in the industry, then what really separates microinsurers from all other insurers? Is it not better to leverage off the existing structures and processes of a traditional insurer to write microinsurance business, such that the benefit to the policyholder can be derived from cost savings due to scale and more protection for the policyholder based on appropriate capital backing? Thank you.
Thank you. Down to the T, you are left with like a second. So I'm going to have this thing on. I'm going to try and warn you when you're running out of time. So it's going to make sounds like this. BONOLO, opposing team, you have 8 minutes.
Good morning. The color coordination was not planned, by the way. The opposing team, Keith and myself, we aim to convince you guys that microinsurers definitely need a separate licensing category. In order to fully understand or recognize the importance of a separate licensing category for microinsurers, it's necessary to think about the holistic picture of why we need microinsurance products, why these products need to be regulated, and why this regulation needs to be different to traditional insurance regulation. In 2022, the World Bank estimated that 1.8 billion people lived on less than $2 a day. Among those people, only 1 to 3% had access to insurance products. And we see a similar picture when we look at the South African environment. The ASISA 2022 study showed that the higher the income of an individual, the higher the proportion of insurance need that is met by actual cover, with the cover adequacy increasing from a mere 6% for the poorest 20% of the market to 60% for the richest 20% of the market. So we can see why we need microinsurance products, simply because the low-income population is severely underinsured. But why do we need microinsurance regulation? Well, there are many reasons, but perhaps the most glaring is that in the past, traditional insurers who have existed for decades have either been unable or unwilling to design appropriate products that meet the specific needs of the low-income population. And traditional insurance products were in the past either too expensive, inaccessible, or inappropriate for the specific needs of the market. And that's where regulation comes in, not only to assist those who have been unable to design appropriate products find a way of doing so, but to also incentivize those who have been unwilling to cater to this market. Microinsurance regulations goes beyond the insurance industry. In 2011, the Twin Peaks regulatory model was established, and it resulted in the enactment of the FSR Act. And one of the Act's objectives is to establish a regulatory framework that promotes inclusive finance. And what's microinsurance? Inclusive insurance. And so when thinking about microinsurance regulations, it's important for the industry to recognize where microinsurance or inclusive insurance fits in the bigger picture of inclusive finance in the South African context. Cool, so we need microinsurance regulations. Why then do they need to be different to those of traditional insurers? Well, the aims of microinsurers are different, in that the target market is more specific and geared towards the low-income population. And this population is characterized with low disposable income, and thus it's important for premiums to be affordable. And affordability is relative, but it needs to be affordable for this market. And the population is also characterized with lower financial education as compared to the rest of the market. And so it's important for products to be simple in order to minimize risks to the microinsurers as well as the policyholders. And that's what we see in the current regs. The microinsurance policyholder protection rules aim to ensure that product designs are simple. And that's not necessarily true when we look at traditional insurer policyholder protection rules, which allow for complex designs. I mean, we've all seen how complicated these insurance products can be. And so if we do away with the specific microinsurance regulations, we do away with the protection that is geared towards the low-income population. If we look at the GOIs and FSIs versus GOMs and FSMs, we see that the latter is a simplification of the former. And this makes sense because microinsurance products are simple, risk-only products of limited size. And microinsurers are also limited to investments in cash or cash equivalent assets. And so the risks inherent in microinsurance policies are lower than those inherent in traditional insurance policies. And so the simplification makes sense. And reality is simpler regulation will lead to lower regulatory compliance costs. And it is very important in the low-income market to carry a low-cost base to promote low premiums. If we look at the SCR calculations for traditional insurers, we see how complicated these calculations can be. And so it doesn't really make sense to apply the same complicated calculations for microinsurers, given that the risks inherent in microinsurance policies are lower than that for traditional insurers. And it is likely that the SCR calculation will likely lead to a capital requirement that is too high for the risks inherent in microinsurance policies. Another big difference that we see in the regulations is the absolute minimum required capital, which is 4 million for microinsurers versus the 15 for traditional insurers. And the implications of that is that it will help drive more players into the market and thus increasing competition in the insurance industry and help drive innovation. But it will also help create jobs and help reduce unemployment in South Africa. And so there's a bigger economic impact to having simpler regulatory and so there's a bigger economic impact to having simpler regulation for microinsurers. In summary, there are two main reasons why we need separate microinsurance regulations. One, to reduce the high insurance gap in the low-income market and improve the state of living for those in that market through appropriate products that meet their specific needs and are appropriately regulated. And two, to contribute to the growth of the economy through job creation as well as a more competitive insurance market. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonolo. We're going to have further arguments from the affirmative team. TASHVIR.
Thanks very much, Malusi, and good morning to all the attendees. So I'll be providing some further arguments and points of conflict supporting the proposal that a separate licensing category is not needed. So I think Ting provided some very nice detailed points related to the GOI, FSMs, GOMs, FSMs, and other technical aspects. I'll try take a more holistic approach. And to assess if a separate licensing category is warranted, let's consider whether microinsurance is meeting one of the primary desired objectives of improving financial inclusion. And when I refer to financial inclusion, I'll consider this from 4 angles. Firstly, are the products simpler? Secondly, are the products more affordable? Thirdly, are the products easier to access? And fourthly, is it easier for providers to enter the market? So firstly, looking at simpler products, so yes, microinsurance products are definitely simpler. As has been said, they risk only, have terms of less than 12 months and so on. So yes, in most cases, simpler products are being provided. But our argument is really that similar products could already be provided by a traditional insurer. The FSCA, TCF, and PPR rules and requirements are broadly similar for microinsurers, and where there are differences, those differences relate more to trying to simplify the products rather than offering the microinsurers any type of advantage. There's therefore no respite for microinsurers from a product design perspective. And in fact, the recent changes from the PA aligning the waiting period levels the playing fields even further. Secondly, are the products more affordable? I understand there is a bit of a hazy link between financial inclusion and product affordability, and I think as actuaries we understand the reasons for that. But there may be stakeholders out there who would desire microinsurance products to be more affordable. And as we know, it's unlikely that microinsurance products would be more affordable. But again, should there be? And could more be done to reduce premiums? So I think digging into this one a little bit more, let's consider 3 broad components of a risk premium. So firstly, there will be your risk cost. And theoretically, that should be the same between a micro-insurer and a traditional insurer. But if a micro-insurer is specifically targeting the lower income sector, and they may have higher associated mortality, then they would have higher premiums compared to a traditional insurer that may benefit from more cross-subsidies, depending on how the products are designed. The second component is the expense loading in your premium. And as has been mentioned, micro-insurers' expenses are usually higher, largely due to a lack of scale. There's also limited benefit from licensing fees. We know the licensing process is the same, and also, as has been mentioned, audit fees are also similar. Although there may be some slight savings from lower policy and governance requirements, I think the lack of scale is probably the main reason that will drive up your expense base. The third component for your premium is your profit or cost of capital loading. And the simpler capital requirements may have had this in mind, but it has been discussed at length that the 7% TP and 15% capital can be higher or lower than doing a full bottom-up calculation, and therefore traditional insurers may have a lower cost of capital requirement. Furthermore, micro-insurers, especially if they are startups, may have a higher rate of return that shareholders require because of the higher perceived risk, as compared especially to insurers, which have a pretty stable track record that investors are usually attracted to. So both of these point towards your profit to cost of capital loadings being higher. So in summary, your risk, cost, expense loading, and cost of capital, all points suggest that microinsurance products should be more expensive, but again, can more be done to avoid this? And looking online, it's difficult to compare products on a like-for-like basis, but I did see some evidence that supports the premiums at microinsurer being higher. Thirdly, in our assessment of financial inclusion is whether it's easier to access microinsurance products. And I actually think this is not likely. Looking at the current microinsurance players that are out there, I see burial societies, and I see certain providers linked to TV services or furniture groups. Now, your burial societies likely already had insurance that they were providing to their members through a traditional insurer, through perhaps a grouped individual funeral arrangement. And your TV services and furniture groups, they are likely entered the micro-insurance space because they have a target base that they can easily access. So there's no evidence of easier or innovative distribution currently at the grassroots level, and the markets currently being targeted were likely already covered. Fourthly, is it easier for providers to enter the market? I think this is a yes and a no. So there is the lower monetary minimum in terms of capital, but the license process is the same, and often the simplicity has a two-faced nature. You have to apply to make product changes, which attracts costs and delays, and such product features may have already been included anyway in a traditional license. So in conclusion, what does this all mean to the question of whether a separate licensing category is needed? I think the system theoretically in place is a step in the right direction, but looking at the current state of the market, changes are definitely needed. Such changes could be made to the GOMs or FSMs as discussed, but I think other changes could be made also to other aspects in the insurance product supply chain related to licensing, product design, and I think there's a dire need for more innovation and players in the market. This can perhaps be addressed over time. I think coming out of COVID and a period of economic weakness, this has hampered growth in the industry, and I think this is more pronounced in the insurance industry. But could more be done with governments and banks to develop funding models to ignite more growth in the market? Or could there be some tie now with the public policy work that ASSA is doing to promote microinsurance penetration outside of the technical licensing category only? Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have Keith next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. So, let's take a deep dive into some less technical but more practical reasons as to why microinsurance needs to have a completely separate regulation. Just as actuaries, I know you love your technical aspects to things, so try not to get bored with what I'm going to say right now. Just Stay with me, please. So now, in various forms, informal microinsurance has been existing in Africa for a number of years now, from tontines in West Africa to Friends in Need in East Africa, all the way to burial societies right here in South Africa. Over the last 10 years, microinsurance has developed into a widely recognized financial intervention that is focused on assisting the low-income population in Africa to basically manage their risk, if I can put it that way. Now, a study done by the International Labour Organization determined that there's about 14.7 million people that are living in Africa, about 32 African countries, where microinsurance is being provided, that are surviving on less than $2 per day. So, of this actual 14.7, South Africa makes up about 8.2 million of those, which is about 56%. And funeral insurance is quite pervasive in South Africa, even in the most remote parts of the country. Now let us look into financial inclusion. Microinsurance business are already being provided by multiple players in the industry, whether these players are actually regulated or unregulated. Now its aim is to provide insurance solutions to as wide a market as possible, but specifically in low-income populations within the country. So, for us to actually achieve this, we need to remove unnecessary barriers to entry, especially on the supply and the demand side. Now, the regulator can assist the supply side through amnesty programs that are mainly focused on formalizing sort of the informal and illegal players that are already playing in this market. It is also important to consider competition and market efficiency. Now, for our markets, in this case microinsurance, to constantly improve and develop its products, there is need for microinsurers to be able to provide their products to as vast a market as possible, and also to be able to compete in doing so. Now, this again will require removal of barriers to entry, and also support product participation. So the regulator needs to support the introduction of new business within this industry. Furthermore, the regulator can also assist financial sector development through innovation or supporting innovation, and also being proactive and flexible when it comes to introduction of new business ideas and models within the microinsurance space. Now, let us consider how microinsurance supports empowerment through SME development. Now, the current microinsurance regulation supports empowerment or SME development, especially for black enterprises in the form of cooperative insurers, emerging black intermediaries, and also funeral parlors. There's also empowerment through design and delivery of funeral products to black households, something that has not necessarily been catered for appropriately by the traditional insurance, and also its regulation. Now, just want to make sure, okay. Now, converting microinsurance regulation to traditional insurance regulation will basically result in most of these funeral parlors closing down. Most of them will not be able to comply with the regulatory requirements that are required by the traditional regulation, and they also won't be able to legalize their insurance portfolios. It is also important to understand that these funeral parlors make up a huge amount, or at least a huge section of black SMEs, right? So, a study that was actually done by the Financial Service Conduct Authority suggested that the funeral insurance makes up about 40% of South African insurance market. Should, hypothetically speaking, all these businesses close down and this section of the industry actually closes down, then insurance market penetration in South Africa will fall down all the way to 2%. So the important question to ask ourselves is, why are we trying to make it difficult for those same players that we've tried so hard to actually include in this market? Now, microinsurance is already helping ensure that the previously informal and unregulated funeral parlors are appropriately regulated. This pretty much is going to aid in consumer protection through the reduction of policyholder risks. Now, as the opposing team, we really understand the importance of consumer protection. However, we feel there's multiple other ways to ensure consumer protection other than doing away with the entire microinsurance regulation. Now, microinsurance is also a composite business, as Melissa said. So it's basically made up of both long-term and short-term business. Now, it provides an opportunity for insurers to actually be able to participate in both these sectors without the need to actually apply for 2 insurance licenses. Now, this will not be possible should you go back to traditional insurance regulation. So, let us understand that microinsurance regulation isn't just a simplification of traditional insurance regulation. A lot of time and effort was put in to try and develop and design this regulation. Doing away with it will basically not only undermine the efforts of all the professionals that worked to come up with this regulation, but it also undermines the industry as a whole. Thus, there's some reputational risk involved here, not only with the South African citizens that sort of already have some negative sentiments when it comes to the insurance industry, but also with global insurance players and investors. It will simply look as though we really do not know what we're doing, and we just haphazardly came up with this regulation, when in fact, this wasn't the case. So as the opposing team, we do strongly believe that instead of undoing all the work that has been done to come up with this regulation, efforts need to be put in towards improving the already existing microinsurance regulation. Just last week, the FSCA decided to actually align the microinsurance waiting time periods with those of traditional insurance waiting time periods. These are certain improvements that we're expecting when it comes to this regulation. It is a very young industry, so we expect that as time progresses, a lot of improvements are going to happen on the regulation. Finally, let us just look at worldwide trends, right? Financial inclusion is facing an increased focus and support from governments, especially in poor nations, through microinsurance. It is also receiving support from supranational organizations such as the UN and the World Bank. Sorry, I'm just going to speak fast. Now, in China, at present, there's a rapid development of inclusive insurance that is playing a very important role, especially in the medical healthcare, micro-enterprise development, and other aspects of guaranteeing the livelihood of the people of China. Now, the insurance law of the People's Republic of China, which is the insurance governing body in China, currently has a separate regulation for microinsurance and traditional insurance. So, I suggest South Africa pretty much tries to remain consistent with its peers, especially those in more developed countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. You guys are like the opposition party in parliament. You finish all your time, and the speaker has to tell you to stop. Thank you so much. We're going to have rebuttals. There's no new arguments that are allowed. I'll just take some liberties here to do 2 things. So one, I'm going to allow the opposing team to caucus to see who's going to do this. So I'm going to start with the affirmative team, and I'll give it 3 minutes because of time constraints. Would that be okay? Okay. Thank you.
Financial inclusion and market penetration are the aims of a separate and more simplified microinsurance license. However, the absolute minimum capital requirement of 4 million rand is still high for informal and unregulated players to access the market, and compliance to regulation may still be quite onerous, especially the licensing process. This is particularly the case considering unregulated players are facing no compliance obligations at the moment. Forcing microinsurance products to be sold only under the microinsurance license is not increasing the amount of microinsurance players in the market. We believe that it's counterproductive if, 1, they are unable to penetrate the market, and 2, they are unable to stay solvent because operational risks and insurance risks are not appropriately allowed for. If traditional insurers are allowed to sell microinsurance products, the governance and capital structures will already be there to manage risk, and they would benefit from scale and allow for more protection to the vulnerable and low-income population. We're not arguing that microinsurance products should not be sold, but rather we are arguing that a separate licensing requirements are not necessary, and that they are in fact impeding the ability for microinsurance to be financially inclusive?
I think there is clear evidence that supports what Ting has covered in terms of market penetration for microinsurance, and arguably the separate licensing category isn't achieving this goal. However, as mentioned, we definitely do agree that improving financial inclusion is a very noble endeavor, but could more be done to achieve this? Or could a different approach be taken? Could tweaking the separate licensing category or doing away with it entirely and offering other incentives for new players to enter the market have a greater effect? There's a dire need for more innovation and more competition to truly penetrate the market at the grassroots level. The separate licensing category in isolation is currently not achieving this. And our argument is really that the separate licensing category could be done away with, and the effort that has gone into that could rather be put into other aspects in the insurance supply chain to try and improve financial inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Opposing team, have you decided who's doing this? Thank you. 3 minutes.
Huh?
3 minutes.
Not 5.
No.
The affirmative team mentioned that the licensing process is the same for microinsurers and traditional insurers. The purpose of a rigorous application process is to ensure that the applicant is fit for business and that they have sufficient financial and operational capacity to manage the business in a solvent manner on an ongoing basis. And while we recognize that the main purpose of such a rigorous process is ultimately policyholder protection, we agree with the affirmative team that this process is too onerous for microinsurers, given that the risks inherent in these policies are lower. But the solution is not to entirely do away with the licensing category, but rather to further develop this process to ensure that the rigorousness, is that a word? The rigorousness is commensurate with the risks that are inherent in these policies. There are exceptions to every rule. So not every microinsurer will apply to the PA to invest in cash or non-cash assets and therefore require market risk capital. And not every or even most microinsurers will have long contract boundaries and thus have to use the GMM IFRS 17 model. So we can't abolish a set of rules that are appropriate and necessary for most just because certain rules in that set of rules are inappropriate to some. Again, the solution is to further develop these rules to ensure that they are appropriate to a wider range of microinsurers. The affirmative team also mentioned that the MCR is an oversimplification of the SCR or the capital requirements, and that the resulting capital requirement might not be sufficient for the risks inherent in the microinsurance policies. But it's important to realize that the calculation methods for the solvency and technical provisions were developed after a long consultation process with the industry, and not just a thumbsuck. It was calibrated with the average microinsurer in mind that has the average risks. And isn't that the same for the standard SCR formula? It was also calibrated with the average insurer in mind that has average risks.
Thank you. For decades now, traditional insurers have failed to.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks to the debaters. Can we have another round of applause for them? Okay, then it's your turn. as the audience to entertain this question on the screen. So you're going to have an opportunity to log in to whatever link you're going to be provided or on the app to vote. So the answers are yes, no, not sure. All right, so are you guys doing the voting? So let's see. Okay, do we need a separate licensing category for microinsurance? The votes are coming in. We have about 92 votes. And just like the ASA elections, they keep you waiting. You don't know what the result is. All right, so I think we kind of have enough votes here and the result is stabilizing. So we're able to see now that the yeses have it. So about 68% saying yes and 26% saying no. So congratulations to the opposing team. All right, so in conclusion, some call to action. I see USTA is here, the PA, probably the FSCA are here as well. And of course, ASA actuaries, we are here. So we've had quite a good debate. So thank you very much to the debaters, quite insightful. So I think there's some take homes to do in terms of looking at the regulations to see if there's any need for refinement. So I think that's it from our side. We have saved 2 minutes. We'll hand back to the chairs for this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melusi, and thank you to our debaters. Congratulations to BONOLO and to Keith, CHEN and TASHVIR. Unlucky, as they say. But thank you very much for your participation. A round of applause, please, for our debaters. Thank you, guys. We're going to take a bit of a break. There will be a mindfulness session during this break if you feel like you need to take a pause before you go out and take a coffee and go on to the next section. There is the chess championship happening during the break, so be sure to check that out in the exhibition hall. If you bought a ticket for cocktails and dinner tonight, please don't forget to get your wristband at the garderobe on level 0. And then after the break, 9:30, Ballroom 1, we'll have the presidential plenary with the presentation of the research prizes, the president's address, and a town hall style discussion with past society presidents and the CEO, Mike McDougall. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you in Ballroom 1 at 9:30.